All right, so this is going to be on chapter 4. This is our 086 class instead of the 240. We're using our old slides for now until we can get these updated. This is really just going to deal with the radiation quantities and units. Just a little background. For most of you, this is a review, but March 27th, 1845, until his death in February 10th, 1923, 77 years old for Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen. Died of carcinoma of the bowel unrelated to his work, so he did not die out of any radiation related illnesses. First Nobel Prize winner in physics in 1901. Accepted a teaching appointment at Columbia University in New York, but World War I kept him basically in Munich. No patents on moral grounds. He thought this technology, as new as it was, should be open to the world, and that he did not want to profit from that. He wanted people to be able to kind of follow his work and kind of expand on that. So he did not have any patents set on that. Basically donated money from his Nobel Prize to his university and rocked a lapel hanging food encrusted beard into old age, which you will see in the last slide as well. These are mathematical designations for the unknown to name his new discovery X-rays. So X has always been kind of the unknown. So X-rays, didn't know quite what he was dealing with then, so he just named it that. November 8th, 1895 is a date you should remember that is going to be typically on most of the tests that you take, as well as the ARRT. That's one of the standard questions that you almost always see on there. 1896, just a year later, we have our first cases of somatic damage, which is basically biologic damage to the body of the exposed individual caused by exposure to ionizing radiation. So not too long after it was discovered, we would have our first cases of damage. 1904, Clarence Madison Dalley became the first American radiation fatality. He was only 39 years old. So an assistant to Thomas Edison created the fluoroscope. Basically had a lesion on his left wrist, he had it amputated, ulceration of the right hand, 4 fingers were amputated, basically worsened, and he died of mediastinal cancer. So probably a painful and long drawn out process. 1903, Shaken Edison said, "Don't talk to me about x-rays, I'm afraid of them." So as great of an inventor he was, he did not quite know what he was dealing with the radiation and the effects that it could cause. Important point to remember is that occupational exposure is only received by workers in the course of doing their professional responsibilities at work. So you're not going to get any occupational exposure if you are not at work. So all the background, natural terrestrial radiation is not considered to be occupational exposure. 1921, so some time later, someone finally said we should have some guidelines. We can live a little longer. British X-ray and Radiation Protection Committee was formed. For the most part, the skin erythema dose was a unit of measuring exposure. Basically, if there was some redness over the skin after X-rays, you would infer that you had too many X-rays. Very inaccurate. It's going to change from patient to patient, different tolerances to sensitivity in the skin. So it did not last that long, but as you can see from 1900 to 30, it was around quite a bit, and that's what most people kind of went by. Short-term somatic effects, these are basically acute or early effects, appear quickly within minutes, hours, or weeks. So it's important to remember short-term will show up within weeks, but usually pretty quickly. Typical symptoms, nausea, fatigue, diffuse redness of the skin, so the erythema there, loss of hair, intestinal disorders, fever, blood disorders, shedding of the outer layer of skin. Anything that basically has cells within the body that have a very short half-life are going to be a little bit more susceptible to the effects of radiation. Long-term effects within months or years following exposure. These things will include cancer, embryologic effects, which are commonly known as birth defects, cataracts, possibility of genetic or heritable effects as well. Tolerance level, this is where your body shows no signs of somatic effects. So everyone has a tolerance to them where you're not going to see any effects within the body, but that tolerance dose can quickly be kind of run over if the radiation is high enough. Threshold dose is a dose of radiation below which an individual has a negligible chance of sustaining specific biologic damage. So at the threshold, basically they say from this area to this area on your response to dose curve here, that there's really going to be no effects that are going to show up from there because the radiation is so little that it's just not going to affect the body. But once the dose reaches a certain point, then you're going to start to get a response. But this one just says it has a built-in kind of safe zone in here, as opposed to this linear curve, which is basically a straight line saying that any dose that you get is going to create a response and it's going to be a straight line, um, kind of proportional response. 1934, the ICRP recommends a tolerance dose daily of 0.2 Roentgens. 1936, that number was dropped to 0.1 Roentgens. So as you look at the history of this, there's really no rhyme or reason of how they figured this out. It's basically they threw out a number and then they just kind of dropped it as they said, well, it's not really doing anything or people are still dying. Well, we just dropped that number a little bit low. The NCRP, also known as National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements, was formed in 1956. Come out with a whole bunch of charts that kind of look at different amounts of radiation that you happen to receive. This one from 2006, so not the most current one, but you can see that the procedures in CT, nuclear medicine, interventional, conventional radiography all make up quite a bit here, almost half of this graph. Most of the radiation received, though, is going to be from radon and thoron. That's going to be the background radiation. And radon, as I think was in chapter 2, I'm not positive, dealt with a colorless, odorless gas that kind of seeps up from the soil. SI, this is a unit of system of units developed. All branches of science throughout the world could communicate using the same terms. So kind of a one and all-encompassing system of units, similar to the metric system that the States unfortunately does not use still. But for the rest of the world, the SI unit is pretty standardized throughout. So you can compare these different dosages based on where people are living and the amount of exposure that you're getting. The States has adopted the system of units a little bit more lately. MPD replaced the tolerance dose in the 50s. This is expressed in REM, basically radiation equivalent man. So you still get the term REM used a lot. 5 REM is the most exposure that you can get within 1 year occupational exposed worker. Effective dose equivalent. 1977 refers to the overall detriment to the entire person as a result of the dose he or she has received, depending on where it was received. So effective dose can be a little bit different based on where it is received within the body. There's iDose, shallow dose equivalent, total organ dose equivalent as well. ICRU adopts SI units for use of ionizing radiation in 1980 and urged full implementation of the units as soon as possible. So in 1980, it does got a lot more common to use the same terms throughout the world. I'm not going to bore you with this. You can go ahead and read this over on your own. Basically just mission statements of the ICRU. SI unit absorbed dose is the gray, named after Louis Gray, developed the Bragg-Gray theory, 1936. Effective dose replaced effective dose equivalent, measured in sieverts, although the USA still uses REM in some cases, but it usually will give you the amounts in sieverts as well. The RAD, radiation absorbed dose, this indicates the amount of radiant energy transferred to an irradiated object by any type of ionizing radiation. So this was basically the way they measured radiation back in, I think, the 40s and 50s. If you look at this kind of radiation protection outfit that you had here, you can see why basically people were afraid of radiation. If you had someone that came out looking like this to hold you while you had x-rays done, you might think that maybe this isn't so safe after all. LET, so linear energy transfer, is related to quality factor of ionizing radiation. This explains the differing amounts of damage from different types of radiation. So basically within a unit of track, and we'll get into this in subsequent chapters, they're going to measure off the amount of radiation received within this very specific line, basically. This is the old quote from Röntgen. This was in his later years. His beard is obviously going gray. Incredible discovery that he made, and he actually worked on kind of experiments throughout that just to kind of follow up on his work and really look at the damage and what it could potentially be as a useful tool for diagnosing obviously broken bones, but being able to see within the body was definitely a game changer for their time.